Hi everyone and welcome. We're down here in my wormery. Over here on the table you can see a couple sheets of paper, and the job that these pieces of paper were attempting to do was to provide a minimal amount of cover for a couple of my worm bins. But obviously they're no longer serving that function. They've been removed. And it's kind of becoming a theme on a number of my different bins here, where I've sort of transformed from covering my bins with plastic to, at this point, even going so far as to leave them uncovered in an attempt to try to help promote the evaporation of excess moisture in the bin. And you can see a couple of my bins still have different types of coverings. In most cases they're just a sheet of paper remaining, and in those cases maybe the level of moisture is not so extreme as in others. But the bins that you see here that have no coverings at all are the ones that I've been finding lately to be a little bit too damp. This bin here, for example, as well as the one right down there, these two bins have been maintained in tandem lately. So every time I would pull one out to feed it, I would be doing the other one at the same time. A lot of times I like to try to find bins that are kind of in the same stage and try to bundle their maintenance together so that I can, knock out more than one bin at a time when I tend to its needs. And in the case of these two bins, it was a week ago today that we had decided that they'd reached the point of maturity that it was time to stop feeding them and try to start migrating them. And to that end, I'll use this one as an example. You can see that the edge of the bin had been set up with a feeding zone, hoping to stimulate the movement of the worms out of the compost and over into that newly established feeding zone. But I was in these bins a day or two ago. I figured I'd check in on them, and I sort of had a little bit of a change of heart. So I'm going to be somewhat changing directions on these a little bit today. So why don't I get one up onto the bench and we can continue the discussion once we get started. So we're going to start with the older of the two bins. This one's 120 days old now. And like I mentioned earlier, a week ago I decided, hey, this looks like finished castings. We're going to try to move on to the next stage. And at that time I had gone ahead and I'd pushed all the material in the bin over to this side, and I'd set up this feeding zone over on the side in the hopes that at some point all the worms might make their way over into here to try to get at the fresh food that had been added. But when I checked in here a day or two ago, I just didn't really feel like what I was expecting to see was happening in here. I expected that there'd be a whole bunch of worms in here, but the first thing that I noticed when I looked in here was that things seemed a little bit dry, and as if they just hadn't really been touched to a certain degree. So I started immediately questioning whether this migration of the worms was even happening as hoped. And then I went ahead and I started stirring up the material over here to see how things look. And I wasn't really that surprised to find that the material was quite damp, but it was also just very, very heavily populated still. And I guess the other thing was that I had gone pretty deep down all the way to the bottom to try to stir up the moisture from the bottom, get it up on the top, give it a chance to evaporate a little bit. And while I was doing that, it just seemed like this material was way too cozy for the worms. It was really damp, and even when I got to the very bottom, I found all kinds of sticks and stems, all kinds of stuff that seemed like it was all edible stuff by the worms, and it made me wonder, hey, if the material is this damp, and if I'm finding this much loose material, especially down at the bottom, that I'm able to stir up, then there's ample food and moisture in this material that the worms would probably have little or no interest in trying to move over into this area that I had set up for them in the hopes that they would depopulate the castings. So you can already see as I begin stirring up this stuff, everywhere you look, every handful is just teeming with worms, I'm kind of building a huge pile here, a little bit higher than I probably should. I gotta be careful not to spill stuff over the edge. So everywhere you look now, because of the stirring that I did the other day, you're going to see little bits of sticks and stem and all little particles of grit that I had added over time. All kinds of stuff that's really, as far as I'm concerned, plenty of reason for the worms to have no interest in leaving. And it kind of made me question whether I had maybe jumped the gun on trying to migrate worms out of this material. It seems to me that I can hold my breath all day and I can expect worms to start making their way over to this side, but there's very little reason, as far as I can tell, for them to want to do so, because the material out here is plenty damp. There's plenty of little sticks and stems and remaining bits of food for them to continue feeding on, at least for a while. So I've kind of had a little bit of a change of heart. I almost feel like I jumped the gun on trying to migrate worms out of this bin. So I've been thinking that maybe the best bet here would be to treat this last horizontal feeding, which was really the first horizontal migration attempt, treat this feeding here as just another feeding of the bin, and maybe not have it focused over here, but actually bring the material over and spread it all out. Give the stuff a chance to really get broken down. Maybe actually at the same time remove a lot of these larger bits that had been placed in here as bedding. And give this material over here, the food at least, a chance to really get depleted. And then switch gears a little bit. Instead of trying to migrate the worms, I think the next best step for this bin is to actually give the worms sort of a starving period, if you will. Sort of a period where no new food is added. Really let them break down all of that little tiny stuff that I pulled up off the bottom. I went down deep trying to pull up the really damp stuff. I was really surprised at how much uncomposted food I was finding at the bottom. Maybe not so much food, it was more like the leafy stuff that I use as bedding. But nevertheless, it's food all the same. And as long as this material has this much remaining moisture and food, I really don't think it is a good idea to attempt migration, because it just isn't going to happen. And it's going to become a frustrating waiting game. So I'm switching gears. I'm sort of backpedaling on the strategy with this bin at this point. And like I said, I think the best bet for this one is going to be to pull this whole feeding zone apart, pull out whatever bits of food are in there that seem realistic to just give back to the worms and mix it in here. And at the same time, pull out any larger chunks so as to not have material that's going to take forever to break down. And then let them focus on whatever little bits of sticks and stems and food scraps still remain in here, until such a point that the material is in fact truly devoid of nearly all of the food that's still mixed into the material. And at that same time, leave it uncovered to allow for ongoing evaporation of the moisture out of the bin, so that the material can get a little bit more dry, a little bit more flaky, and at the same time becoming a little bit less hospitable for the worms. And at that point, they might be motivated to go seeking a better place to be. So I think I'm going to grab something that we could toss all this stuff into so it's easier to pick through it. And then we'll rearrange the contents here. It seems like it should be easier to pull out these large chunks of cardboard first. Just kind of rummage through here and grab all that, since they're pretty large pieces. You can see we've got a pretty good number of worms coming over to, check out what's happening here. And it's because it's such a heavily populated bin. We're going to definitely find a fair number of worms in here. And it almost seems like a shame not to extract them at this point, because that was the game plan here, right? Was to migrate them and start moving them and relocating them. But like I said, I'm sort of backpedaling on the strategy here, and I'm going to leave the worms that have congregated over on this side in the bin. That's also partly because I don't really have a place to relocate them quite yet either. I've been talking about setting up a new bin to be my target for ongoing migrations of worms, because the newest of my bins has been the recipient of all worm migrations lately, and I feel like I've already more or less reached capacity on that bin. I don't want to go crazy overloading it with too many worms, so I am due for a new bin into which ongoing worm migrations can be relocated. So this will also give me a little bit more time to get that new bin online, so that at some point when I am ready to begin relocating worms, I've got a place to put them. So you can see I'm not only picking out these large chunks of cardboard, I'm also, as I encounter them, I'm also taking these chunks of food out too. There was a banana stem in there, there was the rind of a melon, there was a couple avocado seeds. This is the stem of some sort of a plant. There's not really that much food in here anyway, so it does seem like they did come over and they did start chowing down on the food that's in here. So the only thing that I'm finding is little scraps and mostly bedding. So they certainly took advantage of the fact that there had been food placed in here. So all of these larger chunks, I'm simply going to remove them and maybe reintegrate them into some other bin, maybe the newest of my bins. Because I don't really want them to have a large supply of food here anymore. I really want them to focus on all the small particles. This is a mango seed, which, as you can see, is extremely a popular spot. It's just teeming with worms in and out of it, doing a heck of a job breaking it down. So I think any worms that are really stuck to a large chunk of food like this, they'll get relocated. But all the rest of them that are just kind of cruising around over here, I'm going to just go ahead and keep them in the bin for now. And we'll think about trying to relocate them at a different time in the future. Hopefully not too far in the future. But their job is going to be to try to break down the remaining material in this bin a little bit further. And at the same time, the material will also have extra time to try to air out and become a little bit more dry, a little bit more flaky, easier to harvest. I think to the best of my ability, I've more or less pulled out all of the larger chunks of paper and cardboard bedding materials that I've been stacking up over here, right there. And then this collection of uncomposted food bits, remaining food items, is in here, which is also coming together pretty good. A fair bit of actual vermicompost, which was left behind as a product of them feeding in here, and some of it might actually be coffee too. Sometimes it's hard to tell the two apart, but the top of it did have coffee sprinkled on it, and I got a feeling a lot of it just had not been consumed yet. So I think this is a mixture of compost and coffee, which we're simply going to spread across the top in the end, I believe. And it'll be really the last feeding, I believe, at this point. And it won't really register as a feeding because this was all actually added as a feeding a week ago and registered in my tracking system as a feeding. So I'm not even really quite sure how to record this in my tracking spreadsheet. I guess it'll just be changed from horizontal migration type feeding setup to a simple feeding, and it obviously won't be quite as much as it had been, but it'll still be their last feeding as of a week ago. And from that point on, I'm just going to start treating this as a bin that's now no longer in feeding mode, I'm really going to start treating this as sort of the wind down to feeding, which is kind of a starvation period where they're still feeding on the remaining bits of food that had been added previously, but no new food is going to be added for a while, until such a time that I feel like the material has really been more thoroughly broken down, where I don't see all kinds of sticks and stems and scraps. And then that extra time that we're giving it might also permit a little bit of drying of the material too. So there's still some little bits of cardboard and whatnot remaining in here, but I think that when we go ahead and sprinkle all this across the top of the surface, we'll have one last opportunity to pick out any larger scraps that we'd like to extract. And then I think we'll be able to let this bin continue. And then we'll check in on it again in another week or so to see how things are progressing. But I think this is the best course of action for this bin. So let's really get everything out of here that's coming out. Let's get this big huge stack of cardboard out. Okay. So now it almost does seem like a shame that we've actually gone through a week's worth of effort to round up a bunch of worms over in our feeding zone, but you saw what was in here. It really is just a scratch of the surface in terms of how many worms are still in this material. So I don't think it's really that big of a deal to backpedal a week and not take advantage of this opportunity to move worms. I think it's fine just to leave them be for now in the bin that they've been in this entire time, and let them all now focus on really breaking down what remains in the bin. So before we spread all this stuff out to take advantage of this opening on this side, I'm going to clear these guys out of here, move them right back over on top. It'll give us a little bit of a glimpse as to how many worms did make their way over. And you can see it's a lot. We got quite a bit of worms over here. It looks like we did a pretty good job skimming out all of the bits and pieces too, because I'm not really seeing too much. And now I believe we can just start moving stuff over. This might also be a good chance for me to pick out any larger chunks of food that I encounter along the way, as well as crumble up the material to help it aerate a little bit. And then this whole setup is just going to go right back up onto the shelf, uncovered. Give it time to air out and dry off. It's always down here at the bottom is where you see so many worms. Down where the moisture collects a little bit. It's really the environment the worms seem to favor the most. So I think there's a lot of value in scooping it up off the bottom and bringing it to the top where there's a better chance for the stuff to evaporate and dry off. But you can see just how many worms are in this bin. This is an incredibly densely populated bin, and that's really kind of the case in all of my bins these days. This most recent batch of composting bins that I've got are all very heavily populated, and it leads to very quick breakdown of the material. So you would have to imagine that if all they've got left in this bin is little fragments of sticks and stems, that it probably won't take too long for them to make mincemeat out of it. And that's kind of my hope. And I also kind of hope that all these worms moving around throughout this material continue to help aerate it and help it to dry. But it is kind of fun looking at all these worms, isn't it? I always really enjoy picking through a fairly heavily populated bin, because then you start to see how many worms are in it, and as you can see, this bin is just teeming with tons and tons of worms. And I already did this, like I said, a day or two ago, so there was already a nice stirring up of the material that I actually found on the bottom of the bin. And I was a little bit surprised at how much material I found resting at the bottom of the bin. It almost makes me wonder if it sort of settles somehow. Maybe it was all suspended throughout the material, but maybe just from the worm action, all the worms cruising around throughout the material. Could that be the reason that the material ends up at the bottom? It's hard to say. It is all the type of material that I use as bedding in most cases. It's all just little pockets of leafy matter. And here and there I just find a little chunk of bedding or a little piece of larger food. But there's really not a whole lot left in this bin, as you could see. So hopefully what we're doing here is going to help promote the complete breakdown of all the remaining little scraps of food in this thing. And hopefully we'll begin seeing the dry out of the material in the bin too. So I think we've done a pretty good job kind of breaking all the material up and agitating it, bringing all the more moist stuff that's down low out to the surface. We've certainly removed a whole bunch of excess bedding and food items. So I think we've got a far greater chance of seeing this material get to the finish line. And then we can start thinking about trying to migrate the worms out of the material. Because once the material is beginning to dry out, once it's been depleted of food, then they'll be more than happy to go find a nice fresh spot where there's a whole bunch of fresh food and moisture waiting for them. And then we should see much better migration results. Okay, I think we're kind of level. That's the way I like to have it. And it's going back up onto the shelf. Alright, we're going to do this to the other bin too. So let's get that going. Oh wow, look at that. So now one thing I had done with this bin, since it is not perforated, the bin does not have holes on the bottom. I had it resting up on the shelf with a piece of wood tilting it over as it is now. And the whole aim was to see if water collects, moisture collects over in this far edge, and that hopefully it would help with the drying of the material. And as you can see, we've definitely managed to collect a fair bit of moisture in this bin simply by tipping it up this way. So that's a relief to see. That was really kind of what I was after. That was the one thing that was distinctly different between these two bins, even though they've been getting managed in a very similar way to each other lately. This one doesn't have holes in it and the other one does, and I was able to observe a lot of moisture dripping out through the holes in that other bin, suggesting to me that the feedings that I had been giving it, which might have been stuff like watermelon and everything, were depositing a lot of moisture into the material. And in the case of this bin, there was just nowhere for it to go. Couldn't escape. It couldn't drip out. So I think that's a plus, to be able to get that much moisture to collect for easy extraction. So I just need a way to sop that out of there. Just going to drop this sponge in here to let it start sucking up some of this moisture. I believe we can proceed with getting all this stuff out of here. Maybe it is easiest if I just start scooping it out and not worrying so much about seeing how much is bedding and seeing how much is food. Might just be easiest to simply scoop it all right out and get it over here into this tray and move it and have it out of our way. We do have some interesting items in here, I guess, right? So we've got a pumpkin stem, which at this point has just been traveling with the worms from bin to bin to bin. And we'll see how long it takes for that to get consumed. It's certainly getting there, but it's still recognizable, so it needs more time. But clearly we're also bringing over a fair bit of moisture in the process here too, which I think should be fine for that newest of my bins. I guess now we're starting to get into that partition cardboard that had been placed in here to help separate the finished castings from the feeding zone. Let's see what else we can get out of here. Well, I think we did a pretty good job. We got the majority of the stuff we want out. Let's just see if there was any other larger chunks of cardboard worthy of extraction. Cardboard and food bits. And a couple more things that can come out, I guess, and get moved over into the newest of my bins. So let me go unload this tray. And we could try to tend to this moisture that's collecting here. I think I'm also going to just relocate this piece of paper. Oh, and I've also got this other one that I had removed from the other one. So whatever, I'm going to just move all this stuff into the newest of my bins. Okay, so I can already see that this sponge is starting to soak up a lot of moisture. I'm going to just flip it over here, but you know what? Let's see if I can try to push a little bit of the more chunky stuff up so that only moisture and liquid end up down here at the bottom, and then we can more readily sop it up. So it's really not as much as I thought. It just looked pretty significant when it was pulled up there at the bottom. I thought we'd end up putting a whole bunch of it into here, but I think that's, again, just scratching the surface. And, you know, we didn't really do the same here as we did in the other one. The other one, things were a little bit more dry in here, so we were able to see that it was dry coffee and dry castings and worms intermingled in that, and we could return it to the bin. Here we took all the worms that had made their way over here, and at this point relocated them into the other bin. So I think besides registering this as a feeding for that other bin, I believe I can also tick up the count of worms that have been relocated into that newest of my bins by at least another few hundred, perhaps another 500 or so worms or more. So interestingly, that's going to take the population of my newest bin probably up into the 5,000 range. So that is a pretty impressive number of worms. But I'm sure we've still got tons and tons of worms remaining in this bin here. I mean, I could say that for a fact because I did the same in this bin as I did in the other bin. I came in here, I jostled stuff off the bottom. I took little piles of uncomposted leafy material and bedding type material and tried to stir it back up into the material throughout so that it's not just resting at the bottom. So right now we're propped up on a couple pieces of wood. I think we can level off again here now, so we can get a better look at what we're doing. And once again, as we go, I think we could just try to pull out these little chunks of bedding as we encounter them, so that they too can be relocated into the newest of my bins. I'm wondering if we can keep this moist stuff over here and maybe take some of this less damp stuff and move it over to this side. There's really not a great deal of difference. It's all quite damp. I did do a pretty good job stirring it all around yesterday, or whenever that was, the day or two ago. But it was all this sort of stuff that I was pulling up off the bottom. Chunks of remaining food that had not been eaten, little sticks and stems and all kinds of things that had made their way to the very bottom of the bin. So I think just by agitating it up off the bottom, getting it suspended out throughout the material, it's going to give it all a better chance at being eaten by the worms and converted to castings. So we'll just do a little bit more of that here, just in case I missed any. If we find any more chunks of uncomposted material at the bottom, we're just going to try to stir it up into the material, and that, I believe, will give it all a better chance at getting broken down. I think you can probably see it on the camera that this material is a little bit more damp than what we saw in the other bin, but I think by extracting some of that moisture with the sponge, we've probably helped a little bit. I'm still wondering if there might be added value to tilting this bin and leaving a little collection area on the edge of the bin for it to be pulled up again, so I can maybe pull out a little bit more going forward. It might make good sense because this is pretty damp material. So maybe what I'll do is I'll save a little segment on the edge that's just open, so that if it does pull up I can see it, and then I can come in here with the sponge once again and try to pull it out. But I don't want to leave too much of a space like that, because I want to be able to maximize the surface area on the top to try to promote evaporation within the bin. So we'll leave a certain amount over here on the edge. Build it up so it doesn't go crumbling. But this stuff is so wet, it's not going to crumble much. But hopefully it will continue to drip a little bit and release moisture as the worms move around through it. And hopefully we'll start seeing some drying happening in here soon. Alrighty. Well, again, I think this is just another example of something I mentioned in one of my videos recently, and I've mentioned numerous times in my videos, is that not everything that happens in your worm bins is always cut and dry. There's always variables that are going to influence how things are progressing. And I think in this case it was the addition of very damp, moisture-rich food into a bin that was covered in plastic, and at the same time the environment becoming much more damp and humid as the summer months rolled in, resulting in a bin whose contents were just much far too moist and damp to be practical. So now we're going to have to correct this situation and give this stuff a chance to air out. Let the worms continue breaking down the food that they've been eating, at least what's been left for them, since we've taken the majority of it out at this point. And hopefully we'll have much better material in the near future. But I got a feeling that that first bin that we worked on is going to get to the finish line a lot quicker than this one, with all this moisture present in this one. So I think when I put this back up on the bin, I will be propping it up again like this to allow any moisture that might be collecting at the bottom to make its way over into this little pit. And then if need be, I'll come back in here with my sponge and sop it out. I'll try to help this bin get a little bit more dry and evaporate out. So I think we're almost done here. I've definitely got a little bit of cleanup to do around here. I'll release the remainder of this collected food into my newest bin, let it continue there, and I guess we'll keep our fingers crossed that things start coming back to a better state in these two bins so that we can once again try initiating the migration of worms and the depopulation of the compost. But hopefully you agree that this was the most prudent action to take in this bin. It does seem like trying to migrate worms was going to just be a futile attempt anyway, so we lost about a week of time there. Hopefully what we've done here is going to help things get back on track. So we'll check back in another week or so and see how things are progressing. I might be back in these bins between now and then on my own off camera just to see how things are progressing. But let's hope for the best. So let me just sign off now by saying thank you. Thank you so much for sticking along and watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to give me a quick thumbs up. Show that you liked the video, and also consider subscribing to the channel as well. That's really appreciated. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.